Hello, and my name is Pete Rushmer, and I'm your host today of A Half Dozen Things podcast. A Half Dozen Things is a podcast for business owners just like you. Whether you're an underdog hungry for success, or you're already smashing it but want to continue to level up, we are here each week for you to get insight and learning from the very best in the business. No fluff, no BS, and no self-proclaimed gurus talking about how easy business or life is.
Yeah, there we go. You've started recording. Red light's rolling. I'm joined today by Miles Watkins. Miles, thanks for joining me on today's podcast. Really appreciate you coming along.
No problem. Looking forward to the conversation, sir.
Yeah, absolutely. So for the listeners, I caught up with Miles. It was at the British Aggregate Association annual conference, and Miles was a guest speaker and was talking about sustainability and to be honest, as far as my level of experience goes, stuff that I have no understanding of at all. So sort of in true podcast fashion, I thought I need to learn a bit more about this. And so do the listeners. It'd be fantastic to get them in. So, I thought it'd be a fantastic opportunity to have a chat with you, Miles, and bring you on. So I approached you and you were kindly and gracious enough to give us a bit of time to sort of talk through some stuff around sustainability and to raise awareness. As part of the prep, I let Miles know that largely speaking, the listenership is like transport managers, business owners, small to medium operators, which largely matches the customer base for my business, Flagship Partners. And it's a real pleasure to have you on, Miles. So just if you're able to just take a minute, mate, and just sort of explain. I know I've sort of given a bit of an introduction to sort of my perception of you, Miles, but also are you able to just sort of explain who you are, what you do, and the sort of companies you work with and the things you do for them? Is that okay?
That is absolutely fine. Basically, I am a sustainability professional, but I've worked in a whole different range of management areas. Essentially, I started my career as a graduate trainee in the aggregates sector. So the rock breaking guys, right? Taking big rocks and smashing them into small rocks and routinely sticking them back together again as concrete and asphalt. So I worked for Aggregate Industries as a graduate. And then over the 17 years I was there, I actually went through to the executive committee. So as part of the executive team, and I looked after all the things that no one else wanted to look after. That's how I described that role. But I obviously led sustainability, but also safety. I did land and minerals planning, marketing, comms, all that kind of stuff. So that was handy because what it let me do was to really position the business on issues properly. And so we were trying to differentiate based on sustainability at the time. So we were making investments into biodiversity and low carbon technology and all this kind of stuff. So because I ran the comms side as well, it enabled me to pull all that together and position the business. So that was kind of fun. And then I went to work for a building research establishment, which probably doesn't bump into the haulage sector too often, but it is the predominant research and training organisation in the built environment. It's been going for 100 years, and I was commercial director there for about 5 years. So I've worked in that area too. So that was really about commercialising sustainability in the technical sense. And that was quite fun. I ran the innovation park and I looked after the businesses in America and China. And a whole lot of other bits and pieces. So that was quite entertaining. And since then, really, I've sort of worked for myself, doing interim bits and pieces. I've worked a little bit in modern methods of construction. So that's largely a sustainability-led piece. So looking at building buildings using preform panels and elements to have less mess on site, less waste in the delivery, fewer people, better safety record, all that kind of stuff. So that was quite relevant. And more latterly, I've been doing direct consulting. So I do work in the quarrying industry still because, frankly, I just love it. And I'm sure that some listeners will be rolling their eyes going, well, how can you be a sustainability professional and work in almost an entirely linear sector? Well, I put it back to them and say, well, that's the challenge, isn't it? The challenge is to square the circle of difficulty in these difficult sectors. Another classic being haulage. We'll talk about that in a second. So I do a fair bit of consulting in heavy building materials. I work a bit with the professional body, the Institute of Quarrying, because I was previously its chairman and president during its centennial year. And my real passion is around low carbon and circularity, which we'll get into further in the conversations. I also have 2 startup businesses. So one called Stuff for Life. You see the logo behind me. That's about polyester recycling, because of course everyone thinks plastic is bad. Reality is plastic is incredibly helpful, and if you stopped it, lots of things wouldn't happen. Just look around you, look at your, the pods in your ears, go to a medical theatre, look at the use of plastic, look all over the place, right? It enables many things.
A useful material, yeah, absolutely.
Understatement would be useful material, absolutely right. But if you use it once, it's not very good, and if you put it in the wrong place, it's not very good. So, my business partner and I have a passion about perpetual recycling of plastic, breaking it back to its constituent materials, and then reforming it into whatever.
Yeah,
that particular business is around clothes, workwear. So again, your fellowship we have many high-vis vests in the environment, I'm sure. And that's how that started. So my business partner and I, he was in waste, I was in construction, and we thought, what happens to all the high-vis vests? Well, what happens to them is they go in the bin and they get burned. That's what happens. So we're breaking them down and looking at reforming the plastic. So I've got that one, and then also I've got a circular economy business in minerals. So we're looking at using technology that basically disintegrates concrete, sequesters CO2, and then releases the aggregates back into the built environment. So that was probably a bit rambly, but at least it gives a bit of an idea of the sort of bloke that Watkins is.
A busy bloke by the sounds of it.
Well, one must eat. That's quite important. One of the cornerstones of sustainability, and indeed part of the UN sustainability goals, is avoiding poverty, right? So, hard work generally is the connection between that and eating, really. So, in all seriousness, I do like to be busy. I like to do progressive things. I'm not, even though I have a PhD, I'm not largely academic. And in my LinkedIn profile, it says, practical solutions, and that's what all it's really about. And whether it's the haulage industry or the aggregates industry, we can kick it around all day long, but ultimately someone needs to do something, and it's identifying what that is and getting it done leads to the progress. And for me, that's where the rubber hits the road, to overuse
I love that. It's like you've listened. It's like you've listened to one of our podcasts before, because that's one of my favourites. When the rubber hits the road, I love it. It's one of my faves. Okay, excellent.
Sorry.
So during the podcast, I prepped Miles with just so people sort of know what to expect, where the conversation's heading. I've just pulled up in the background the email that I sent over, because I had a look at the presentation that Miles had done for the British Aggregate Association, and there's some bits in there about the UN Sustainable Development Goals, so we're going to have a bit of a talk about those, and then look at carbon emissions in the transport sector. We're going to look at net zero highways and plans from the national highways, and some viable alternatives as well around the traditional type combustion engines for HGVs, as well as sort of how fleet operators can be sort of more sustainable. So sort of kick it off, those sustainability goals that you led with on the British Aggregate Association conference discussion, what are those sustainability goals? Because it was a slide that was very colourful, it was very interesting, there were lots of fantastic things there. I'm sure people can frantically go and Google the UN sustainability goals, and they'll sort of pop up on Google for them. What is that as a starting point, Miles?
Well, I mean, that's not bad advice, to be honest. And if you're listening to this, why not have a bit of a look? Because let's not go through all 17. I mean, the general principle is the United Nations has been working on prosperity, if you like, across the world for a really long time. It's obviously part of its core objectives. It held the first Earth Summit when I first went to university in 1992. And that was in Rio. And that was sort of kicking off the realization that things needed to be done. And a lot of sustainability on a global basis is around, frankly, inequality. So there isn't equal access to things. And as we sit here in Great Britain and go, well, what channel on the telly shall I watch? And indeed, what telly shall I buy? Somewhere between 50 and 90 inches and that kind of stuff. Some of this stuff just passes us by. And maybe we remember Bob Geldof and Live Aid and all that kind of stuff. But, we live in quite a comfortable space. But when you look at the world, there are some fairly chunky problems. And a lot of it is driven from greed and distortion and a whole lot of other stuff, which means that there are a great number of people that don't have access to things like food and water and education and healthcare and all this sort of stuff. So that's the super big picture. So over the course of time and through a bunch of summits and a lot of collaborative work, the UN basically teased out these goals, which represent the things that need to be fixed or done or delivered to make the world a better place. So when you look at them, which you probably are, you look at them and go, well, that doesn't make any sense to me, but some of them do, right? So some of them do make sense to British industry, if you like. So the stuff in there on responsible production and consumption and all that type of stuff, and there's a direct translation there into what you do as a business and gives you something to think about. But equally, there's things in there that you're not going to touch, and that's because the world's a big and complicated place. But it's a UN-led thing. It was developed over about 20 years. And it's a comings together of all. It's almost like a list of things that are all broken that need to be fixed to give people a chance. So that's helping the people with less up a bit and give them access to things, and then stopping the people with everything ruining it for those other people. That's broadly what it is. And one of the challenges of sustainability is it's often seen as like a reductionist agenda. Stop this, don't do that. It's kind of hard work. And one of the things that I always try and do, and so do the people that do what I do, is to try and find the positives in it. So, if you just go around telling everyone that they can't do stuff, that's not a fun thing, is it? I mean, no one likes to be told that kind of stuff.
That's a bit like health and safety gone mad.
It is. Yeah, I mean, it's much worse as well, because other than keeping yourself alive, which is not an unreasonable thing to do, you're talking about someone you never met, right? So it's I mean, when I first started in the rock breaking industry, of course, I was like this crazy left-wing lunatic. Those people sort of looked at me, and I was like, well, maybe, but probably not. So there are some unhelpful narratives around sustainability that make it sound like we can't do stuff. And what we need to do is make it sound like we can do stuff, and we do stuff differently, and we try and make it interesting and exciting. Otherwise, the thing won't progress. We won't go anywhere. And I think, one of your other questions in there was around, well, how are things going? Well, on a global scale, of course, it wouldn't escape your attention that it is a bloody nightmare and an unwieldy disaster on lots of levels, which of course is all very depressing. And that's because man and lady, people have done a really good job at creating that scenario, and it's not been helped by recent things. So as we sit here today, you've got, the war in Ukraine has distorted trading, and particularly energy, which we've heard about quite a lot. Climate change itself is driving, some horrendous, it's exacerbating drought and flood and fires and all this kind of stuff. And then along comes COVID-19, which suddenly means that mobility has been massively restricted. So if you were having a problem eating and drinking and being educated to start with, and now you can't go anywhere, that is a monumental issue. And of course, without doubt, it has affected every person on planet Earth one way or the other, and you don't need to be poor to have been affected really badly by it. So all of these things come together and make it generally really, really, really hard to do what are already really hard things. So that's sort of the backdrop. But more importantly than that is, frankly, it just gives you a list of things to look at. So you said, Peter, right at the beginning, I don't know much about this. Well, that's for a start not true. But companies don't need to invent things. We can look at lists that clever people have thought about and gone, and then you go, well, how does my business relate to this stuff, and what can I do now and in the longer term to help that particular agenda, in the knowledge that the generations that are coming behind me will probably feel better if I did something than didn't do something. And it's very easy to make a very long list of reasons to do nothing, but between us we've got to find some motivation to do something. And if you've got lots of millions of people doing a little bit, it adds up to quite a lot in a kind of Tesco's kind of way. Every little helps. So as much as it's, and I look at all the feeds coming through and LinkedIn and everything else, and I look at a lot of stuff that comes through from the sustainability professionals, and we have to be really careful, a bit like the thing about health and safety, that, the doom mongering thing, it's important to a point because there are some massive crises going on. But what's important is, what are the solutions? How do we at least move things forward a little bit? And no one has all the answers, and no one can say, oh, right, I can see a pathway right the way through to 2050. I can see all the things that I need to do. Well, they can't really, because you don't know what the world's going to be doing in 5 years' time, let alone 25. But what you can do is to see the broad direction that you need to go in and be as strident as you can to try and go there. And I think that's not unreasonable, and it's not an unjustifiable thing to do, to be honest. So big colourful chart, list of things that are wrong with the world that people can relate to. Some are more relevant than others, and it frankly stops you sitting in your chair going, where do I start and what do I do? Because someone's done a lot of thinking. Now your job is to do the doing.
Fantastic. And I think that's a really nice starting point for the conversation. And as you were speaking there was a few things that cropped into my head that I haven't even thought about in a while. So like just sort of giving you an opportunity to have your coffee and that whilst I sort of ramble for a mo. And that is, I find sustainability, particularly, obviously I know the transport and the fleet sector because that's the sector I operate in, but it's quite emotive. I find it quite emotive, or people find it quite emotive. And there's a few things that I sort of raise there, and that is certainly when I look at social media and that kind of thing. Greta Thunberg, for example, people find her very emotive. But also, I used to work for Volvo before I did what I do now. I worked for Volvo Trucks, and there's quite a big thing in the UK around Euro 6 vehicles. And, there's been this thing from Europe where they've pushed vehicles to achieve, certain levels of the emissions that they cause, and that then creates the Euro 6. And then what happens is like those old vehicles, once they're kind of done for in the UK, they go to these workshops and they get the Euro 6 decommissioned back to and taking all of the AdBlue pumps off and all the AdBlue systems and everything like that. And then they get shipped off and migrated off to Africa where they haven't got the technology to be able to maintain these complex AdBlue systems. And essentially you've got this disparity in the playing field where you've got operators in the UK operating under really strict guidelines for safety and for the environment and those kinds of things. AdBlue pumps, AdBlue systems, when they go wrong, are hugely expensive for sort of small to medium-sized businesses. For them to then know that once those vehicles then get exported, they're sort of downgraded again to then go and sort of pollute somewhere else. So I have a lot of or I've been aware of a lot of the rhetoric around it's just unfair. It's really unfair. But I think at the same time, as a developed country, I think my position is that we have a responsibility to be able to lead the way in what we're doing. And I think without that, then we can't pull other areas of the world along with us. I think is sort of, I guess, where I'm at. I don't really know if that's sort of the right frame of mind to be in, Mars.
Well, I don't think it's unreasonable. I think successful nations have got some leadership responsibility. I think you're absolutely right. Because if they don't do that, it doesn't sound very good, does it? Well, I'm doing pretty well over here and I'm not too bothered about you lot over there. That's not really very sort of world spirited, is it? But equally, within our own world, people do find this sort of stuff quite threatening. And in your sector, right, there will be, without doubt, a ton of small businesses that are operating relatively small fleets, and they'll be like, what do you mean? Are you telling me I can't operate a haulage business because I burn loads of fuel? And are you saying that I can't drive my trucks as far as I want to drive? I mean, all that sort of stuff. It boils down to very, some quite threatening restrictions, some of this stuff. And I'm quite aware of that. And that's the whole point about trying to turn it into opportunities, which isn't that easy. I mean, let's not sit here and go, super easy, right? Let's just chase the gold at the end of the rainbow. It's stuff's bloody hard, otherwise it'd have been done by now, frankly. And you're right. There are lots of perversions in this where you might argue that having a truck and getting as many miles out of that truck as humanly possible is probably the right thing to do, as opposed to keep replacing it, and therefore keeping it in circulation and keeping its life as long as possible is a good thing. So having a first life in Bracknell, and a second life in Namibia, and possibly a third life somewhere else is, in theory, isn't such a bad thing. However, of course, you have got its ongoing, polluting activity to contend with. So again, that requires a little bit of thought. But as a principle for everyone to think about is make do and mend, and getting the most out of things is not a bad start, right? Because one of the nasty habits of a rich country is you really do buy a lot of stuff, right? And people chew through lots of things. No one needs 42 t-shirts, right? We do, and I'm as guilty as everybody else, right? We do have, so just buy good ones. That's the sort of thing that's a real problem. But one of those things is making stuff last as long as possible. And we were chatting about, just before we hit the record button, we were talking about cars. And I tend to be that person that buys a second-hand car and then keeps it going. Because I just think it's probably the right thing to do, really, is to get as much out of it as possible, maintain it properly, service it properly, all that kind of stuff. And then update it to the best thing I can afford to update it to. And I've just bought a Tesla because I was saying to Peter that I felt a bit dirty buying a liquid fuel car. And honestly, it's cost a lot of money. And it's actually, I wouldn't go quite as far as saying it's keeping me awake at night, but it is niggling in my mind that I've now entered a fairly long-term commitment to something that is that's definitely needing to keep. I now need to be busy to be able to pay for the thing, but it felt like the right thing to do. But you're absolutely right, Peter. There are lots of complicated things in here, and you get loads of tension. So the Euro classifications has really come from local air quality, isn't it? So that's about particulate emissions, and particularly with diesel, with stuff being blown out the exhaust pipe and that kind of thing. And anyone that ever goes into Birmingham with a car, or indeed London with a car, will know all about this, right? Because my other car is a 2013 vehicle. It's diesel, and I can't get into the middle of Birmingham or middle of London without paying a ton of money. Even though the thing does, well, yesterday I came back from Taunton, did about 57 to the gallon, right? So it's not uneconomical, but its tailpipe emissions are not to the right standards. So you've got a trade-off there. But that it's not, the CO2 scenario there is not unreasonable, but tailpipe emissions not so great. So you get this issue with sustainability. You get loads of trade-offs, and honestly, you just need to look at them and make your mind up. And and if people chastise you for that, they can go away, because if you've looked at it and did the best you can with the information you had in front of you, that's all anyone can ask, right? I mean, that's all anyone can ask. Not thinking about it isn't great, but actually thinking about it, I'm going to do this because based on my values as a human or our business and what I know, I'm going to do this, and that's fine. You don't need to be a world-leading expert in this stuff. You just need to stop and think a little bit, really. And whether it's a brand new or second-hand Volvo tractor unit or a T-shirt, the same sort of thoughts kind of apply, really. It's like, where does this stuff come from? What am I going to do with it? How long is it going to last? What can I afford? What can I not afford? It's just putting the thought into it, really.
Yeah. Okay. And I think the answer to this question isn't one that I prepped you for, but I think you'll be able to answer it really well, and potentially it'll be really meaningful to the listeners. So we have a scenario. Watkins Haulage Limited. Okay, Watkins Haulage Limited have taken up running, I don't know, they've got 50 HGVs, units and trailers that are doing sort of regular work up and down the country. And you obviously have the knowledge that you have as a sustainability professional. What are the things that you would be looking at in your business to reduce or maintain sustainability? Because I'm conscious of using reduce now. Having listened to you, it is about this trade-off. Obviously, it's not necessarily just about reduction, but it's also about sort of what it is that we're doing. So, what is it that you would do to improve the sustainability in that haulage business?
Hi, it's Pete from Flagship Partners. We're proud to sponsor a Half Dozen Things podcast. Flagship Partners help their clients become safer, greener and greater through a range of consultancy and training services. We offer audits through to risk assessments, contracts through to support with managing your culture, all the way from mandatory training through to management training as well. So if you need any support, please do get in touch with Flagship Partners today.
So I think number one is to think about keeping the business going and growing it, really, because employing people and paying tax and that kind of stuff is very handy, right? So let's have that as the core piece. I think in the world of haulage, I think my understanding, being who I am and just having a look around, the ultimate sin is an empty lorry. So driving air around, whether it's all air because it's completely empty or half empty, is something that needs to be thought about. And it's interesting, right? So when I worked in, and I can never get this going, but when I worked in rock breaking back in the aggregate days, of course, the firms have their own haulage, either their own or tied one way or the other. But you do get an awful lot of trucks driving past each other empty. And you just think, this can't be right. This can't be right. There's got to be a better way of optimizing this somehow, where it's multi-nodal. And of course, the haulage sector are quite good at this because you've got a truck and you've got lots of customers. So you've got half a chance of doing that. But obviously, minimizing emptiness is a good thing. Even if you charge your customer to drive the empty lorry back the other way, it's still worth putting the effort in. But the good news about that is that should be economically incentivized, because it's got to be better for anybody to have a full truck you're being paid to move than an empty one, right? So there's a nice union there between money and doing the right thing. So I think that's the no-brainer and where the proper effort proper effort needs to go. I think after that, really, you're into using whatever you got in the most efficient way you possibly can. So just basic stuff. Don't let it sit there idling unless it's powering a refrigeration unit or something like that. Don't thrash the thing to death. Drive at the most economical speed. And obviously, as a car driver, I'd go, do you really need to overtake that one in front of you that's doing a third of a mile an hour less than you are? That'll attract a few comments from hauliers, I'm sure.
No, absolutely. The old drivers, that's an emotive subject,
isn't it? It was for me yesterday and the day before and every day I get on the road. So there's a whole efficiency piece around that, and some sectors have done really well at this because they put people through driver efficiency training, all that kind of stuff. But it's got to be worth doing, and it benefits you because you're buying a load of fuel, right? So why wouldn't you want to be efficient? And people generally do this. And then I think, quite honestly, it's about being brave and try some new technology, and it is expensive. So of course you've got, I suppose today you've got fuel switching. So you see organisations switching across to biofuels, and in particular dehydrogenated vegetable oil, a version of which I think has been used by McDonald's for a really long time, isn't it? It's sort of been allegedly burning its chip fat. Now, I've not really gone into the detail of how much of that happens. I don't know either way. So,
nice marketing tool. It's a nice marketing tool, isn't it? I don't know. How
well, I can't believe for a minute it's not true because, well, interestingly, the government in the UK in particular is now getting very, very keen on the quality of green campaigns to make sure that organisations aren't lying to people, because as consumers are becoming particularly motivated by greener things, they want to believe what they're reading. So it wasn't that long ago when the government thought that about half of all claims were just sort of baloney, really. It's a bit sad. So we're not making statements either way on what McDonald's have done or not done. But fuel switching to let's call it bio and organic fuels is a way of reducing emissions. It's also a way of driving your costs up, and it's also a way of exposing yourself to lots of other things. So, for example, in HVO, you have to be careful about what it's made from, because if it's all made out of palm oil has got its own issues. So knocking down rainforests and building acres and acres and acres and acres and acres of palm is not that wise from a biodiversity perspective, right? It has lots of its own issues. So sometimes what looks like a good thing isn't a good thing, and that's why you need to go asking a load of questions. Well, okay, I'll use that bio-derived fuel, but what is that bio bit? Am I displacing precious habitats? Am I displacing food crops? Because, of course, we only have one planet. We've only got so many fields, and we talked about it half an hour ago. Eating is quite important. So we want to remove food and add in fuel on the land? It's a bit difficult. But it is possible to switch to a biofuel. It is also possible to use an additive to improve the combustion of that, and there's a few of those around to try and close the gap between the cost between the two. So there's that piece. So that's a relatively easy technology to go after, and then it gets more difficult, doesn't it? Because I think at the moment there are not many electric trucks. I've noticed certainly the heavy side have started getting into it. I think Tarmac, I believe it is, and apologies if it isn't, for those who own this, have got some electric truck mixers. Good for them. The concrete mixers, so you've got propulsion and agitation of concrete there that's powered electrically. Obviously, we know our mate Elon Musk is going to come up with a funny shaped thing that looks quite interesting at some point. But I do think it will take, or there will be new entrants into that space, because I've noticed that both in cars and trucks, both the classic producers of these units aren't migrating that quickly, and because I think the need will be more aggressive than the solutions. Your Googles and all the, and some of the mega Chinese firms like your Tencents, which is similar to Google, that have got a decent level of liquidity, can enter this space because they're not dragging all the historic baggage with them about how it used to be. They don't sort of tell themselves, well, it has to be like this, because they don't know anything about it. They're like, well, we've got to drag 50 tons from A to B. How are we going to do it using a battery like this? Those sort of organisations start filling space. And honestly, I think your medium-sized haulage firms, at least, and the smaller ones that have, quite entrepreneurial and quite successful, need to start treading these boards a little bit, really. Maybe share a truck with another firm, right? Experiment with stuff, because sitting on your hands is not going to move your business forward, because you get so far with, getting the most out of your trucks. You'll get so far with not being empty. You'll get so far with fuel switching, but ultimately there will need to be a technological shift. And I think like I said, I think batteries is an obvious path for some. and then probably some form of hydrogen, I would have thought, but that's quite a tricky beast. But sitting on your hands won't help, not engaging won't help, and it will involve taking some risks, really, is probably where I would go. But the easy ones are, I say the easy ones, they're not even easy, are they? But the simple ones, that's a better phrase. The simple ones are avoiding empty trucks, maximum efficiency, potentially fuel switching across to a biofuel. If you can satisfy yourself, you're not causing a ton of other problems downstream. And back to the thing about opportunities, I think, I think the gag here is to try and win business off the back of doing this stuff. So if you take UK CO2 emissions, 25%, the biggest lump on the pie chart is from transport. But I know 80-odd%, 85% of that nearly, certainly 80% of that is cars. So you look at it on a mileage basis. Of all miles driven, only 5% is driven by the haulage industry, but it's about 16% of the emissions. But if you ball that up then, so it's 16% of 25%, right? So actually in total, it's actually quite small on the chart. Still lots and lots and lots of tons. So I think that, yeah, I mean, it really is. Yeah, I mean, it really is about trying to look at the basic practicalities, what you need to do first, and then looking how brave you want to be when you want to walk into the new technology space. But it's very easy to look at it and go, well, look at the UK emissions for a tiny bit. But if you're a company, so if you're like Aldi or Amazon or something like that, because you're humping a lot of stuff around. If you look at so on the UK emissions chart, here's haulage, little tiny bit. If you look at a supermarket, the road haulage emissions relative to all its emissions is probably a really big piece of its pie chart, right? So those commercial businesses thinking, oh, Christ, I've got to do a bit of net zero here. Where do I start? I know where I start. I start at the fat end of the stick. What's at the fat end of my stick? Haulage. So you'll start to see more pressure coming on haulage firms to go, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? What can you offer me? But equally, the other way around, you can go, well, I see you are organisation heading in this direction. I've just purchased a load of these things. I can reduce your CO2 by X. Can we do a deal, please? So I'd very much like to look at this as
where the smart money is, isn't it? That's where the smart money is.
Well, it is not as simple as, I've got a load of new trucks that are better than air trucks. Can I have the work? Yes, you can. Here it is. We all know it's more difficult than that. But to be in the fight, you've got to have a credible story. And I'd like to think in the short term, before this is all normalised, there are opportunities available for those that have got the confidence to give something a go, and there is work to be won by being greener than the other person, and we know that's true because if you look at the procurement rules that are in place in organisations and we read them, it is trying to select things in the supply chain that are lower carbon and more circular and all this kind of stuff. So we know this because we can read it. We see it in the press. I mean, in 2008. When I was at AI, we managed to win the concrete and aggregate supply to the London 2012 Olympics because the bar was set really high on sustainability in terms of recycled content and carbon measurements and all this sort of stuff. So this is real. This does happen, and it happens more every day. More organisations are making more zero carbon commitments. More of them are trying to buy better things in the supply chain. More of them are exposed to really big CO2 emissions from their incoming deliveries and then their outgoing deliveries to customers. So I think there's opportunity there. It's not easy, it's not given, but you're not going to get it if you don't have a story and you haven't made any commitments. And you just got to look at your customer base and look at what's available to you and what you can reach and go, what's the business case for me to give this a crack of the whip? And I think, as every day goes past, I think it strengthens and ultimately consumers are starting to pull it through. I mean, it's interesting how the behaviour is changing, actually. So given all the bloody nightmares that are going on in the world, if you look at fashion, the whole second-hand clothes thing is just going absolutely bananas at the moment. In a minute ago, we've gone from how much fast fashion can I consume through to where can I get second-hand clothes, like this. Now, okay, it hasn't gone quite like that, but there's been quite a big shift in mentality. So, I think consumers are going to be fussy, and as the new generations come through, they're still going to be struggling with fuel poverty and all the bits like that. But I still think that the newer generations are going to not want to compromise on trying to not ruin the world. because they, they might make it better for themselves next month, but it hasn't really sorted the journey out. And it's what's really interesting about that today is when you look at some of the rhetoric that's come out of this Conservative leader, Prime Minister replacement stuff, and the tactics that have needed to be employed to win the popularity contest in the Conservative Party membership, and then how you fit that into the general trends in society that might not quite be the same. So that's going to be really interesting to see what short-term things happen that potentially change the course of sort of long-term commitments. But by and large, I think business and consumers over time are getting more motivated by doing better with their pound. And I do think that will present, and it does present, opportunities for the haulage industry and general supply industry to try to engage with that in a positive way. And that's the whole point about trying to avoid this reductionist agenda. Can't do this, can't do that, can't drive that far, blah, 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 blah. Because I think it's demotivating. I think it drives normal people away from the cause. And on that basis, it's really unhelpful. But if we can find a glimmer of commercial hopefulness in there, it gives you something positive to go at, right? And that, for me, that's really important. So there you go. That was a slightly long-winded answer, but efficiency, fuel switching, new vehicles, and then using that to win business from people that want to work with firms that are putting the effort in to make a difference. It's my shorter summary of the question you asked me, what feels like about an hour ago.
That's fine. I think you've done a fantastic. I knew you'd answer it in a really good way, because people are listening and they're thinking, well, what does this mean to me? Really, really, what does this mean to me? And there's a few things you said that really resonated with me. One of which, more recently, as you just mentioned about the sustainability of the clothing options and things like that. My daughter, or my stepdaughter, she's 16, and she's not particularly, she wants to go and study medicine and what have you, but she's not particularly engaged with what I'd say environmentalism or green movement or anything like that. But she refuses to shop in the high street at all. She shops in charity shops for clothes, and she's fairly, interested in her fashion and things like that. But she realizes if she goes to the right charity shops and she looks carefully enough, she can find really nice clothes cost effectively, but also in a sustainable way. So very interesting.
And that's increasingly common now. I mean, and as the generations come through, they just don't look at the world with the same lens as us. They can't.
No, absolutely.
The principles of how they were educated move quite a lot. The amount of information that is available to a person today compared to even 10 years ago is absolutely phenomenal, isn't it? I mean, it doesn't take 2 minutes to look stuff up, and you can look at it from 4 different sources and triangulate it really quickly to make sure it's not a lie. That wasn't in place decades ago. So, if you're 15, 16 years old today, you're just in a completely different headspace to where we were, 30 years ago, whatever, 40. And that will make a massive difference, because these kids just don't tolerate stuff. I'm just not bloody doing it. It's not even a discussion. So, and I think that will lead to sort of a hockey stick shape change in some markets, because, like I said, the new pound will be going somewhere else, or people, they just go, well, I won't have one at all then. People are, they're not like killing themselves to have a thing. They go, well, if it's that bad, I just won't have one. Whatever it is, item of clothing or electronic goods.
I think particularly with like our generation, certainly I see my generation, and I think about, Amazon, for example. If I can't get something tomorrow, why the fuck can't I get it tomorrow? For free. On Amazon, and that's kind of what I've got used to. But you have to sense check that against, do I really need that tomorrow? I've survived for the last 30 odd years without it. I'm just buying it now. This consumerism.
No, you're right.
I really need it.
You do. You are right. The most important conversation is the one with yourself most of the time. So you have to do a bit of sense checking. But you're right. We get very conditioned to the speed of delivery, and when it's a day late, you just despair, don't you? It's like the world's obviously falling apart. What the bloody hell's happened here? And it is really easy to buy stuff, and we do it. We all do it. I do it. Everyone does it. You open Amazon and go, I want one of those. One swipe, done. 24 hours later, it's the front door. That's not lacking. That's not unimpressive, is it? Let's face it. But every swipe with a thumb like that could do good if people thought through what they were buying, the impact that it had, the questions they might want to ask. With the same thumb action and not very much different pounds, you could make quite a big difference. And I think increasing this, as your stepdaughter is a great example, we're seeing more of that. I think the money and to get sustainability to work comes back to the same point again. We've got to use the flow of money to deliver it. What we cannot do is to say no and stop money going round. You cannot expect the economy to let's put that another way around. We have to find a way to get the economy to deliver this stuff. You can't go 90 degrees to the money. It is just not going to work. People will dismiss you as some kind of, socialist lunatic, and you ain't going to go anywhere. You've got to find a way to fit in with the flow of cash, divert the flow of cash into the right things, away from the wrong things. And of course, law will nudge this in the right direction. So without getting really boring, there will be more what we call producer responsibility type legislation. Now, you've seen, and automotives had this for years, so car manufacturers need to do recycling. Now, they may not get their actual car back, but they've got to put a ton of money into making sure that cars are being broken down into bits and the components are recycled. Plastics like this, packaging's been like this for a while. But increasingly, if you make a thing, governments of the world will expect you to take lifelong responsibility for that thing. So either you need to get it back or you need to demonstrate you are doing the equivalent somewhere else. So there will definitely be a movement there, and there will definitely be more tax on new stuff, and there will definitely be more incentives on second-hand stuff. How that plans out, I don't really know, but you don't have to be a wizard to be able to predict that kind of thing. I think some organisations are just not seeing this coming. I was talking to an organisation in a completely different sector, sells fairly high value goods, yesterday, and I don't think they're seeing this coming. And I'm thinking that in a minute someone's going to come along and go, you see those things you're selling for lots of money, you're going to have to find a way to show us you're recycling those or getting them back or something. And if you're not putting your brain into that now, that's going to be awfully expensive when you come to have to do it. But my argument to those guys is, well, maybe, just maybe, there's a commercial advantage of thinking about this now, because all the rich people you're trying to sell your stuff to are the young people like your stepdaughter, right? So if you're a new money person and you're 30 years old and you've just made $1 billion and you want to buy an expensive thing, it wouldn't surprise me if you got quite choosy about what you were buying, right? So it's not just normal people that can make a big difference, the rich people can as well. So even if you're selling luxury goods, you should think through the possibilities that are in place for doing something a little bit different with a little bit more benefit. Because if you can make a business out of that, the world gets better and you still make money and life is good, right? So always hard to do, definitely worth the effort, because otherwise you're going to end up in part of the pack that's got diminishing access to customers, aren't you? Because if you think more and more customers are going to want this kind of stuff and you're not doing anything, you're electing to be in a smaller and smaller part of your of the customer base. And then I don't think from a business strategy perspective that makes a lot of sense, really, to be honest.
Absolutely. I think really, really, really valuable stuff, Miles. I think I've got one last question. I kind of diverted away from what we prepped, so I totally apologise. I think one last question, which is something that's resonating in me, but hopefully it's quite practical for listeners, and that is, we were talking about moving away from this reductionist conversation to, being sustainable, and I think it's a bit like something but that I look at regularly from a safety point of view, which is how do we promote the dialogue? How do we promote the dialogue within our businesses to look at the stuff, like you've just said, to look at the stuff without coming across as a lefty type, getting branded as the person who's, I don't even know what the right language is to use, but you know what I mean, but be discriminated against or passed off as that person who's looking to try and have a conversation that other people just aren't willing to have yet. How do we start to land those conversations in businesses that are sort of struggling, or with people that may be struggling to listen? How do we approach that?
Okay, I think it sort of comes back to a similar sort of thing. Well, for a start, there's nothing wrong with being left wing and having those views. That's absolutely
no, and absolutely.
So I'm not at all making a case for anything in that space. It's just sometimes in the context of the traditional businesses that sounds a bit odd. So on that basis, for me, it does all come back to the business case. So here I am selling a thing or a service. I'm looking at a set of customers. where over time the demands will change for whatever reason, their own shareholders, their own kids, some kind of epiphany. Their customers are looking for many things, and some of that will be more recycled content and lower carbon, right? For example, we as a company supplying a thing need to get together and have a bit of a think about how we fit into that world and how fast we go after it. And the more people you can involve in your organization in doing that, the better. So when I do my sustainability consulting in this space, it is all about the commercial context, and it is all about getting right down into the bottom of the organization to go, look, the world's moving a bit here, and we probably ought to move with it, or maybe even help it, because not helping it leads to where we were saying a minute ago: fewer customers, more difficulty. So how do we work together to do better things, whether that's in the manual end of business differently or the thinking end of business differently? For me, it is about getting the participation, which is just good management practice. This is not a sustainability thing. This is just good management practice. High levels of engagement, high levels of participation, and of course, there's a well-trodden path in safety, because safety works very badly when it's only led, and it works very badly when it's only rules, but it works much better when there's a good old narrative about it, because the company really, at the bottom of it all, just doesn't want people to be hurt, because who wants to hurt anybody? It's madness, isn't it? And that's a much better way to try and tackle things, which is otherwise the danger is very similar in safety, isn't it? You can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this. You've got to, you've worked for 3/4 an hour. About the time you sat down, well, actually, if I did one more minute, I'd have finished the job. There's lots of frustrations in and around this stuff, and they don't completely go away, but good level of engagement, good level of dialogue, really important. And also, it's just bloody arrogant to think that just because you lead an organisation, you've got all the answers. Well, you don't, do you? I mean, it's just total bollocks, isn't it? So some of the best stuff comes from people that do the real work, with the hammers and the steering wheels and the fork trucks and the bags and all the stuff that goes on, the actual work that goes on. When you do a thing every day that's often quite manual, generally speaking, you have some fairly reasonable ideas about what's wrong with it and what could be better, whether that's from a safety perspective or a sustainability perspective. And those are just the best conversations, really, because people just go, why do we do it like this? It's mad. I come into work every day and I do this. And if we did that would be an awful lot better, wouldn't it? And you're like, you're right, it would. And for me, absolutely, that's more, that's more refreshing. And, from a haulage perspective, the best people to probably make it better are the people that drive the lorries. Why? Because they're driving a bloody day, right? It's like they're driving along going, why is my truck empty? It's not, I've just driven halfway across the bloody country to deliver half a truckload. Now I'm driving back empty. Okay, made a few quid, but what a bloody waste of time that was. I'm mildly facetious here, but the ideas for this stuff come from anywhere, and people, all of us, need to accept ideas from anywhere, and not be so arrogant that we have all the answers and we're great and important and get paid a load of money, therefore lead from the front. Sure, you can lead from the front, but occasionally you've got to go and talk to everybody else as well. Engagement, dialogue, commercial context, keeping customers, getting new customers, finding a way to find the positive journey and around sustainability is just vital, or it will just be a ball's ache, and we won't get any progress. So I'm really quite adamant about that type of stuff.
Fantastic. I think I was going to say I totally resonate with that. The only thing I would totally agree with you is that if you want to know where the wastage is, speak to the people who are there at the sharp end, because they know where the wastage is. They look at it and go, can't believe I'm wasting my time doing this. I can't believe I'm wasting this resource, or I'm wasting that, or what have you, because they see it day in, day out, don't they? So 100%. Absolutely got to engage them. Yeah, absolutely got to engage them. Miles, finally, is there anything you'd prepped that I've not managed to cover yet with any of the questions? Is there anything that you want to add before I sort of close things off?
I think we've you did ask me. I tell you what, you did ask me some questions about the highways.
Yes. Yeah. The net zero goal for highways agency, for national highways. I can't remember what they call themselves these days. National highways.
Highways, I think, this week. Yeah. Well, new government might be something else next week.
Well, that's true.
So, but good, really. So government has got two roles in it. So one is it does a load of laws and stuff, and the other one is it buys loads of things, right? So in a sustainability journey, the government's quite important, and across this spectrum, it has worked quite hard on buying things differently. Bigger topic for another day, but quite entertaining, quite interesting. The Net Zero Highways plan breaks into three things. It's got its own stuff, so its own offices, activities, and everything else, and it wants to make those zero by 2030. It's then got all the maintenance and building activities of roads, which it wants to make zero by 2040. And then there's the road use stuff, trucks and cars and things, where it wants to be net zero by 2050. And it's in that last category, it only really has influence. But obviously what it's trying to do is to make it easy for people. So more charging points, and big ones as well. Because if you're going to charge a truck, you need a big cable. So, it's going to start looking at infrastructure around that kind of stuff. It's obviously it will look to incentivize certain things. I think it will throw some money at trying to move the agenda forward. But of course, from a usage perspective, it has very limited influence, which is why it's put it at the end of the queue, because it's a slower burn and a longer burn, and it only has a facilitative role. The big pressure for haulage will come from the customer base. It'll be, hello, I'm from Aldi. I want you to halve your CO2 emissions to be our supplier. That's the sort of stuff that will have the big impact on haulage firms, I think. And then the idea is, hopefully, the government will help provide the infrastructure to make it work. Because there's no good buying. I mean, I already have it with. Well, actually, one of the reasons I bought a Tesla was because I wanted to be confident I could charge the thing, and then the supercharger network, which in the meantime they've seemed to let everyone else use. But the whole point of that was I got access to it, so it's cost a lot of money, but I'm paying for peace of mind. I've got friends with electric cars that have queued up at charging points, turned up at broken charging points, struggled to find them, and that undermines confidence. So we know an electric truck, generation 1 and 2 electric truck, is going to be very expensive. If, as well, the haulage firm is going to struggle to charge it, that is going to discourage the adoption, isn't it? Because a truck that isn't moving isn't making any money. And of course, it isn't moving when it's charging. And if you can't find a bloody charger, it really isn't moving. So that's where the HA, no, it's not the HA, it's what it used to be called. That's where National Highways, NH. That's where those guys come in, is to ensure they are facilitating an infrastructure that allows all the stuff that we just talked about, because you're not going to gain any competitive advantage having an electric truck if you can't use your electric truck, right? And like I said, there's another hour of conversation about electricity, because there are real infrastructure issues in this country around electricity. I do a fair bit on renewables, and quite a lot of the renewable energy schemes, solar and wind, if you can get planning, another conversation, you can't plug them in because the grid is so weak and so Victorian that you can't do it. So actually you've got an infrastructure problem here. So in lots of these areas, to be honest, Peter, the desire runs quite a long way ahead of the actual practical ability to do these things sometimes, which can be a bit disappointing. So I think, to be honest, sir, I think we've probably gone down the list. I think we've gone down that list and lots of other lists, haven't we? So hopefully,
we have. Went for a few
just some interesting things for people, and I think that just give it a go. You don't have to if you speak to someone, look, the world is in trouble, and you could make an argument that says we've got to go absolutely mad and do it all in the morning, right? But equally, we've got to be practical. Doing nothing is not great. It's not great for your kids. It's not great for your planet, and it's slightly spineless and pathetic. Doing something would be good. It's just working out what that thing is, so you don't spend more money than you're earning, and you're taking advantage of things in the marketplace that might be there for you to pick. So I'd encourage people to try and do that, because I think it is the right thing to do. And I think there are rewards to be had. And the longer you leave it, the fewer rewards there will be, and the more you're going to get kicked along by the legislation, and that is not fun. And I know that and trade bodies spend huge amounts of time writing to government going, please don't do this to us. So the idea is to look over your shoulder, see what's coming, and move slightly ahead of it, so you don't have to have the pain of being told what to do, because none of us like being told what to do, right?
That sounds like really sound business advice, Miles. I really appreciate you coming on. If people want to continue the sustainability conversation with you, where should they come and find you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. That's an easy one to do. I've got lots of email addresses, but that's probably a good start. Or you can find me, you can email me at mw@stuff4.life. You can find me there. But yeah, LinkedIn's not a bad place. And I'm keen to, I'm keen to engage with business, and I'm keen to engage with business who actually want to do things. I'm not keen to engage with business that want to make up a load of rubbish to pretend they're doing things. I just can't. I'm just not interested in that sort of stuff. I'll help people that want to be helped. I won't help people that want to tell lies. So that is the filter.
Yeah, that sounds like a good filter for anything, Miles, to be fair. Miles, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for joining me. And thank you, people, for listening. If you do enjoy it, please do share it with your friends. And hopefully see you on the next one. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. See you soon.
I really hope you loved today's episode. And if you did, please make sure you subscribe and listen out for future episodes too. Please do share it across your social media channels. We hope to reach more and help more people. If you want to find out more about me, my name's Pete Rushmer. You'll find me across any social media channel and my business, Flagship Partners, and we're your partners in success across your business. Thank you. See you again soon.